Cool. Why don't we go ahead and just get started and other folks can join as we go. Sound good? Cool. We just want to say hello and welcome to this morning's office hour. Thanks for joining. With just about 2 weeks left in the active part of the challenge, we're really excited to gather you guys together from the shortlist. So thank you for joining. Hopefully we'll have a few more folks joining as we go along. And so the purpose of today's call is just to talk about storytelling. We'll jump more into that in a little bit. So I'm Chelsea and I'm from the OpenIDEO team. We'll do some quick introductions in just a moment, but wanted to get some housekeeping out of the way. Looks like most of you are already on mute. Thank you for doing that. Just remain on mute through most of the call unless you'd like to speak up, and in which case you can take yourself off mute. We've got a chat box here that we'll use during the call, so feel free to use that. We'll be monitoring that and you can add comments there. So with that, let's just get started and introduce ourselves. So my name is Chelsea. I'm a challenge manager with the OpenIDEO team based here in San Francisco, and let my colleagues.
Hi, I'm Ashley Tillman and I'm a community manager with OpenIDEO. So that means that I will be asking comments and supporting you throughout the challenge process in this next phase.
Hey, I'm Scott Shigeoka. I want to celebrate you all for coming into the refinement phase. This is so exciting. We're so happy to be here. I'm a storyteller with OpenIDEO. Just a quick background, I started as a journalist at the Washington Post, so my background's in media, but I've worked for the last 10 years helping startups and organizations tell their stories. So we're going to talk about that later today.
Great. Oh yeah.
Hey guys, I'm Kati. I am the Amplify program coordinator and I am based in the New York office.
And I'm Salam. I am also based in New York, as you can tell, and I am with the Amplify team as the program director.
Perfect, thanks guys. We would love to meet all of you that are on the call too. So Ashley's gonna lead us in just a quick icebreaker before we hop into some of the content for today.
Yeah, so one thing we try and do a lot at IDEO is practice our creative confidence. And so we're just gonna take 2 minutes and grab a piece of paper and a pen and draw how you're feeling on a Post-it. So on your marks, get set, go.
Or paper with whatever you've got in front of you.
All right, 30 seconds. All right, and now I'm gonna count down from 3 and we're gonna do a big reveal. Show your Post-it towards the screen. 3, 2, 1, reveal. That's amazing. So one thing we do a lot at IDEO is we practice drawing and being silly, because when you draw, it gets you out of the more linear part of your brain and into a more creative part of your brain. And also a lot of creativity comes from being vulnerable and being willing to be a little bit messy. So thanks for already being willing to jump in and get started with that all.
Perfect. Great, so we're just gonna share a screen for a moment. Move on to the next slide. So to just align on the goals for today's hour together, we're going to give a quick update on the challenge and where we're at in the process. Scott's going to help lead us through some storytelling strategies, learning about what it means to tell a clear and compelling story, and then do some activities to practice shaping what your organization's story could look like, as well as learning a few ways to give and receive feedback and a few takeaway lessons and kind of activities that you can do on your own time. So we'll start out with a little bit of a share out, move into the participatory exercises, Kati will help us get through some of the questions that were submitted ahead of time, as well as feel free to send your questions in live. And we'll be ending at the top of the hour, so we'll get you guys out of here on time. Great, so we just wanted to give a quick update of where we're at. So today's Monday, and as you know, we're going to be kicking into the next phase of the challenge today, a little bit later today. We've got a quick slide here for you to show where we're at. So you've all been along with us for the journey, and as you know, we're just finishing the feedback phase as of last night. And so what that means is that you are out in your communities getting feedback from community members, participants, staff, as well as at the same time, we had a set of experts reviewing your ideas, and they finished up, and we cannot wait to share with you some of that feedback. We'll be starting today, so you should hear from us either today or tomorrow with the feedback, and you'll get that in the comments section of your idea. So the refinement phase is really meant to be a time for you and your team to figure out what is it that you'd like to wrap up, to refine on your idea. And we hope that this storytelling session will help you figure that out. You'll have until next Thursday, October 26th, to finalize your idea, and we'll be available on email, and Ashley's available through the comments section and the platform, and we can't wait to collaborate with you on that. As you know, looking forward, December 15th is going to be the announcement date of the winners from the challenge, so we're working towards that date and are excited to be participating on that journey with you. So that's where we're at in the challenge. We'll kick into the focus of today's session, which is storytelling. Scott, I'll hand it over to you. Thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, so excited about this. I wanted to, before we jumped into talking about what makes a great story, talking about how to improve our ideas and the stories of our contributions on the challenge, I wanted to just take a second for us to think about maybe a recent story that really stuck with you. So maybe it's something that someone said, maybe it's a story on an organization's website who really inspires you, maybe it's something a friend shared. And I want you to think about, why do you think that story really stuck out to you? And I want you to just get your Post-it, get your piece of paper. We're just gonna take about a minute and a half to think about some elements of what makes a good story based on the story that you were told and that stuck with you. Does that make sense? Well, let's start some reflection music and then we'll do a share out. Okay, does anyone feel maybe called to quickly share to the rest of the group? You don't have to share what the story was, but maybe if you want to just tell us what were some elements that made it a really good story that stuck with you. And you can go ahead and unmute yourself in the bottom left. If you don't have a microphone, you can also send it in the chat box.
Hi, my name is Louisa, and I work with Creative Action Institute. And I was thinking of a story that I recently heard about a woman who works with our organization or received some trainings from our organization. And the story was really specific and had a really clear character, articulated some of the challenges that she was facing and the impact after having participated with our organization.
That's really great. Yeah. So there was a clear challenge. It was a specific story, and there was a character and anecdote that was involved with it that made it really compelling. That's really great. Thank you. Welcome. Maybe one other person want to share?
Hey, this is Bill with iPass, and I was just going to add that stories that capture your attention quickly something that's compelling and moving, or tells a vivid story, and hopefully does that in a short period of time.
Ooh, I love what you're saying about a story being moving, right? Like, it's inspiring us towards action. It's inspiring us to do something. And then also about the hook, right? Like, how do you get people interested in your story quickly? I think these are really great. And welcome, and thanks for joining us. So yeah, these are all really great elements. And I think this exercise is pretty easy for folks because and it's the reason why I have a tattoo of a fire on my wrist, which is that we've been gathering to tell stories since the early days, and stories are really a part of who we are as humans. And whenever I think about a core human experience, I think about stories. So I wanted to just take a step back and say, yes, this is a workshop on storytelling, but really the gift of story is already in you. You are already a fantastic storyteller, just as you are a creative being. And so really what we're gonna do moving forward is we're just gonna learn some strategies to open up ways that you can tap into a gift that's already within you. So what we're gonna do today, there are so many things I wanted to cover, but really I think this is a great place to start. We're going to do 3 different things in this call today. One is we're going to talk about the story blueprint. So we're going to talk about what is the core message of a story, and that's called the story brief. Then we're going to empathize with our audience. What are the things that they need, and what action do we want them to take? So that's the audience brief, similar to what Bill was saying. And then what's the big idea? So how would we describe our story in a single sentence? So that's the story blueprint. Then we're going to move on to feedback. So how do we give and receive feedback? That's actually one of the most important parts of both the design process and also the storytelling process, is to get something in front of people, to ask for feedback, and then to take the feedback that's really important and refine it in your story, just as you would with your idea. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, how do we actually test our story? So how do we bring the contribution that's on the OpenIDEO challenge and platform out into the world? And how do we actually get people to give us the feedback that we're looking for, so that we can refine our ideas, which is the main goal for this phase. So this is all in your storytelling toolkit, and we'll send that out, a more revised version as well in the future. But you can also follow along in your toolkit. And I just wanted to start by saying, just like the design process, the storytelling process can sometimes feel like this picture. I don't know, has anyone just like nod your head vigorously if it's felt very ambiguous at moments when you're trying to tell your story? You're sitting at this blank cursor on the OpenIDEO platform. You're like, what do I talk about? How do I start? And there's so many different directions, right? So that moment of divergence is real. That is real. But the goal is to try to figure out how to actually converge and how to get to something that is really resonating with your audience. And the formula that we use, that's also in your toolkit, is how do you make sure that your story is clear, and how do you make sure that your story is compelling? And so we're going to talk both about how to make a story clear and how to make a story compelling in just a second. So our first exercise is story brief. Like, what is it that we want to actually say about our story? What's the message, and how do we motivate our audience towards action? So that's what the story brief is all about. And I'm going to give you a formula that we use. And basically it says, I want to tell a story about blank so that I can blank. And so the first blank in this Mad Lib is, what is a story you're trying to tell in a really brief way? And the second part of the Mad Lib is, what is the action you want the audience to take as a result of your story? So an example is, I want to tell a story about my leadership skills so that I can get a promotion, right? So it's pretty clear what the story is, what the action is. I want to tell a story about the nonprofit I work for so that I can inspire a foundation to fund our efforts, right? Or I want to tell a story about the impact of our work so that I can inspire people to participate. So these are just 3 of many examples of what a story brief is. So we're actually just going to take a few minutes here to fill out our own Mad Libs. And I want you to think about your post on the OpenIDEO platform. and think about what is a story that you want to tell about the idea that you submitted, and what is the action that you want someone to take as a result of hearing that story. So we're just going to take a couple minutes and then we'll go into a share. About 30 more seconds. Feel free to continue to refine, create another story brief if you've already created one. Great. Does someone maybe want to share? And I love what Louisa and Bill did by just quickly introducing yourself, sharing your organization, and then, yeah, maybe share your story brief. Elise or Ashley or any of our call-in users, or Louisa or Bill.
I can start us off. Maybe someone else will.
Okay, sure.
Want to share something? One example is I want to tell a story about a powerful program so that I can get support from the local leaders in the community to engage.
Love that. Yeah.
Okay, mine was I want to tell a story about girls' potential so that I can help others give them the space to lead.
Hi, I'm from the Norwegian Afghanistan Committee. We want to tell a story about issues linked to reproductive health and the use of drugs so that we can create awareness on implications of drug abuse in Afghanistan.
Great. Yeah, and thank you both for sharing. I actually think it was really helpful to have you both share back to back. I was just thinking with the first, Ashley, your share, I love the framing of girls' potential. Like, that's very inspiring, and when I think about compelling, that's so great. I'm curious to learn more about what like a more focused area of what girls' potential means to you and what specifically like you want to tell, and if there's a specific story in mind that really exemplifies the potential of girls. And then to yours, Elise, I love how specific it was, and that you're really clear on the story that you're trying to tell and clear on the action that you're trying to create. And I'm curious to learn more about what that looks like as you start to put more details into it. So I think, you know, it's similar to when we're designing a question for a design challenge. We want to make sure that our question isn't too broad and our question isn't too narrow, so that we can make sure that it's serving as many people as possible while still being specific enough to design around. And the same is true for our story brief. We want to be specific so that we can be clear about the story we're trying to tell and the action we want people to take, but still broad enough to allow for inspiration and for possibility. So those are really great shares. I'm gonna move right along here to the audience brief. So now you've done this story brief, you have a core understanding or general idea of what story you want to tell on the platform, and you know the action that folks want to take as a result of hearing that story. Now it's time to fill out the audience brief. So this is really about understanding the needs, the motivations, and the impact that you're trying to achieve. And similar to the design thinking process, if you've been following along using the IDEO.org design kit, for instance, or following along using any of our resources, you'll probably notice that empathy is a key part to the design thinking process, especially in the inspiration or the research phase. Same is true for storytelling. We really need to empathize with the people that we're trying to share our stories with in order to make sure that it's resonating with them, that it's clear, that it's actually compelling them to action. Because our assumptions about whether information is clear may not actually be true when we're actually sharing our story and listening in for feedback. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some time here to fill out a really quick audience brief. And again, I'll just take a step back and say we're going through these exercises pretty quickly because we want to get through them all, and so that you have an understanding of how they work and we can have some discussion on it. But you can go back after this call and fill out these audience briefs or these story briefs or any of these other tools we're going to talk about in further detail. But in the next couple of minutes, I just want us to really think about these questions here. Who is your audience? And again, staying on the OpenIDEO platform idea that you submitted, who is the audience that you're trying to reach out to? There's a couple that come to mind probably, but focus on one. What is it that this audience group cares about? And what do you think they value, or what are the things that they're motivated by or incentivized by? And then think about what part of your work would make them curious to learn more, right? So going back to that hook that Bill was talking about, or what makes a story really interesting or engaging, what is it about your work that would make them want to learn more? So we're just going to take a couple minutes here to go deeper into that. And if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat box. Just about 30 more seconds to fill this out. And I would say try to get as specific as you can and try to get as deep as you can in thinking about what they might be motivated by, what you think they value, what do you think their needs are. Great. So I just wanted to, before we jump into share, Bill had a great comment around, it's a little hard to get past thinking of the audience being the funder. And I think that, we all have our needs as an organization, and that tends to be the audience that we focus on, right? So if we're really looking for visibility, someone in the media or someone that is an influencer might be the core audience member that we were thinking about. If funding's a real need for us, we might be thinking about a foundation, maybe a specific foundation, maybe a government, maybe someone that funds our work. And same if, right now you're really hiring a lot and you really want to ensure your story is resonating with your employees, like that might be a really interesting audience group. So I think recognizing that it's okay for us to have audience groups that are front of mind But you can also use this to think about other audience groups as well. For instance, local community members you work with, potential partner organizations, etc. Does anyone maybe want to share what their audience brief is, and yeah, tell us a little bit more about the audience you'd like to capture with your story and what they care about?
I can go first if.
Yes.
Yeah. So our main target group would be youth. And especially here in Afghanistan, a lot of it is very much linked to family and future, being their own wider family, as well as their soon-to-be new families. So very much in the work, we think that, for instance, when we're working through art workshops, music, it gives also a voice in a less, in a more, do you say, it's in an environment where they might express feelings in a different way than they're used to. So that they're able to have a free space to express themselves in different ways, and perhaps not necessarily starting with words, but to use art, for instance, as a way of developing their ideas and thoughts in a safe environment. And this room for expression also enables further discussions that usually might be very difficult to start with if you start by only having discussions and conversations.
I love that. And Elise, I love at the end, really going deep there, thinking about the freedom to express themselves. That's really important. They value that. And then also safety, the safety to express themselves were two things I heard. And then also around family and what does the future hold? And something that you talked about, which we're not gonna have too much time to talk about today, but is something important, is the medium in which we tell a story. And so what I mean by that is you can tell a story through a written piece like we do on the OpenIDEO platform, or with photos or videos like you do on the platform, but you can also use music, you can also use art, you can also use video. There's so many different ways to express ourselves, interactives, handouts, experiences, right? And so a lot of different ways to tell stories. That's really great. Thank you. Another individual that wants to share? Oh, I think Danny, you're sharing, but we can't hear you on the mic. Hey, Danny, I think that there's a mic issue. We can't hear you right now, unfortunately.
Can she type it in to the chat box?
Okay, so maybe we'll have you type it into the chat box, and we will make sure that we give space and time to respond to it. I'm so sorry. I really wish we could hear what you're saying. Oh, man. Okay. While she's doing that, would anyone else like to share?
Sure, I can share. Ashley from Mercy Corps Center for Adolescent Girls. Our audience is adolescent girls, and we found out last week that as much as they care about their place in society and social norms and expectations, at the same time there's like this competing force that they care about their own independent destiny and making choices on their own, and figuring out how to make those choices in this community structure where a lot of the times other people are trying to make those choices for them. So we thought that was really interesting. And the part of our work that we think that they would be curious to learn more about is this concept of sort of putting them in the lead to tell us how to do programs.
what I really love about what you just shared is you identified attention, right? Which is very real and really is present in a lot of our work as designers or as leaders of our organizations. That in a perfect world, right, there wouldn't be tensions, but actually maybe in a perfect world there would be, because tension is where growth lives. Tension is where understanding lives. And so I think it's really important for us to identify these tensions. So thank you for bringing that up. What I also love is that folks are really focusing in on the people that they're serving. So that's a really great instinct to focus in your story audience on those that you're going to be ultimately working with, and really getting back to understanding their needs and what they value. Really great shares. And I don't see Danny's audience brief in the chat box, but hopefully she's still getting there. We're going to, just for time's sake, move along, and when she posts that there, we can respond to it. Okay, so just to recap, we've done the story brief, the high level understanding of what story we want to tell and what we want the audience to take action based on our story. We also talked about the audience brief. Who is our audience and what do they care about? What do they value? And now we're going to do something called the big idea. And this is really about understanding what is the one message that you want your audience to take away from listening to your story. So what I often think about is, say you're at the cinema or the theater, and then you watch this film, and then you're on your walk home or on the bus home. What is it that, as a film director, what is it that you want that audience member to think about on their bus ride home or on their walk home? What's that one core message that you want them to take away from watching your movie, right? So that's a great way to think about the big idea. And I just put a note of caution at the bottom of the slide, which is sometimes I think we want to bombard people with a lot of information, but we find that actually getting as clear and concise as possible is really helpful, and that less is more is sometimes a value that works really well in storytelling. So we're really going to take that mindset in this activity, which is also in your toolkit, which is, how would you explain your idea to a 12-year-old in your country in one sentence? How would you describe your organization in a single sentence to someone that's 12 years old? And we're going to take just some time here to write that down. This can be challenging, I think, for some people, so it's okay. This is that moment of that slide with all the lines going in every direction. But just try your best here. Love the cat in the background. That's great. Okay, so we're just going to take a few minutes here to write down our big idea. And as you finish your big ideas, if you want to type it into the chat box, that's a great way for us to take a look at it and provide some feedback to as many as we can. So again, as you finish writing your big idea down, you could just type it into the Zoom chat box. You can get to the chat box by hovering your mouse over to the bottom of your screen, and there's a button that says chat. That'll open up the chat box where you can type in your sentence. Thank you, Louisa. Again, as you have your sentence, just jump into the chat box and about a minute left for this exercise. We'll just give about a few more seconds for Bill and Danny and others to write in their sentences. Great. Okay, so we'll do kind of like a live workshopping for this, and we don't have a lot of people in this call, so this is great way for us to go a little bit deeper into the feedback, so everyone can learn from each other. I'll start with Elise, or I'll start with Louisa. Sorry, Louisa. So unless girls have the power to make choices, they won't thrive. Creative Action Institute builds leadership skills so girls have that power. So what before I guess I jump into feedback, maybe it would be helpful to learn a little bit more about what it is how I'm going to be framing feedback and the questions that you can ask. So we actually could do some modeling. Maybe let's do that. So this is really about how do we invite for feedback from our one sentences? How do we actually give feedback for one sentences? So actually, Louisa, if you want to actually share your sentence and then maybe ask me the one or two or all of the questions on the left side of the screen, which is asking for feedback. And then I'll respond with the giving feedback side, which is the I like, I wish, I wonder model for giving feedback. And I'll put that into practice. So I'm going to just let you take it away, tell me your sentence and ask for feedback, and then I'll give you feedback.
All right, sure. So our big idea, which I left a part out of when I typed it, is unless girls have the power to make choices about their lives, they won't thrive. Creative Action Institute builds leadership skills so girls have that power. So I would love some feedback on this idea. Was it clear? What was confusing?
Well, so I guess I wonder, I think it is clear that you are focusing your efforts on girls. I wonder where those girls are located. Is this local? Is this in a particular region? I wonder what the word leadership skills means to you. And I'm curious about how the Creative Action Institute builds leadership skills. That's just where I'm at in terms of wanting to learn more and where my mind was headed in terms of curiosity. Does anyone else have feedback they want to give? Clarity.
Good.
Sort of where I was headed to, wondering how is it that you build the skills was something that I wondered.
Okay. Great. So I don't know, should I respond to that, to your questions, or should I ask, do you like me to go down this list?
So I think the purpose of feedback is to really learn as much as possible. So if you have an additional question that you want to ask or something that you want to maybe learn more about the feedback we're giving, that's a great way to get more additional feedback.
Okay.
If you think you're set, you can also move on to another question too. So
yeah. I think I'm okay. Those were good questions to make it more specific. Definitely get it.
Well, okay, great.
Thanks.
Elise, do you want to share your big idea and then also lead us through a mini feedback session?
Well, so the brief explanation is to a 12-year-old, we want to help you to make good choices for their future. So of course it's very generic. I don't know if you want to say something. Yeah.
Yeah, what would you like me, how should I comment on it? What's exciting? What kind of feedback would you like?
Well, it's a one sentence. It doesn't really say all that much. So I don't really know how good it would be as an example either.
Okay, so wondering, is it a good example of what your organization does? Okay, so I think, well, I'm curious. I think what it is telling me is that you're really future focused, and that there's an ability to support young people with making good choices so that they're set up for their future. Similar to the feedback that I gave Louisa, I'm curious. You know, and again, this is shaped around a 12-year-old that you're telling in your country. So I'm curious about, you know, how are you going to support me in making good choices? And what is it specifically about my future that you want to support me on? Is it about family, which is something that you mentioned that I'm really curious about? Is it about work? Is it about life? Like I'm really curious to learn more about what the good choices in the future are. And I think your instinct around there's only so much that I can say in one sentence. Like it doesn't do it justice to tell everything about what my organization does is very real. Definitely agree with that. And I don't think the goal of the one sentence is to try to share everything that we want to talk about our organization, but it's really to just get to the core of what we do in a way that's really compelling. So I guess I wonder if there's a way to get a little bit more specific, and to draw a detail that really helps me understand the kinds of good choices or the kinds of features that you want a young person to have. Yeah. Any other questions you have or anything else you want to learn or know?
No, I think it's good. It's more about the exercise, so it's good to reflect further on when being more specific.
Well, yeah. So I think just for sake of time, or should we just jump into? We can do Bill's. Let's do Bill's really quickly. Okay, Bill, why don't you lead us through a feedback session?
Sure. So I wrote, we help women who are pregnant and don't want to be. I realize, of course, it's also very generic. It didn't specify where, our project proposal is, which is actually Bangladesh, dealing with refugee women from Myanmar. But what questions do you still have?
Yeah, I'm curious to learn, or does anyone else want to jump in? I don't want to
Go ahead.
Well, I'm just curious to learn about what it means to help a woman and if there's a specific are these women coming from certain parts of the country? Are they of a certain age? I'm just curious to learn more about who they are and how you help. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder a little bit about how, and this might be something that may not be in your one question or your one sentence, but might be in a bigger description. How are you connecting with the women? Are they coming to you? Are they being recommended to you? What's the connection point?
I'm curious to learn more about don't want to be as well. Like, what are some of the things that you're hearing, and that might help me better empathize with what individuals are, experiencing and those that you're serving.
Okay, so those things would be then written into a further description that where we'd go with this, basically?
Yeah, great. Okay, so good.
Yeah.
I wanted to give feedback on the feedback sessions, which
Yeah.
and we're in a sort of a constrained period of time. But I think the goal really is when you're asking for feedback, I think a couple of just key things to remember is learning more about the feedback that you're asking. So if something isn't clear, or you want to know how to incorporate it into your story or into the thing that you're sharing, like asking that question, Bill, is really important. I think the second thing is this is an opportunity for you to refine in the moment. And so if something's not clear, you can always say, okay, oh, that's really interesting. You want me to get more specific. So what if I said, we want to help young people in Afghanistan? Like, would that be a more helpful way for you to understand where it is that we're working with? So I think, again, like a way that you can best utilize feedback sessions is you can start to refine the idea in the moment and get some feedback based on your hunches. And then I think another thing to think about is letting folks know why you're asking them for feedback is really helpful, and then just thanking them. So, saying like, hey, this is a reason why I want, you're a really great storyteller. I would love to learn more about, what are some things that you would want to change, Scott, based on your experience working with story? Oh, really interesting. Okay. How might you change that in my story? Would you put it in the one sentence? Would you put it in another part of the post? Like, utilize it. I'm really curious to learn more about your thoughts. So I think making it interactive, try to learn as much as possible. So I think that was really great. Good job. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for stepping up to that process. I know it's it can be very daring to share out your one sentence. And I think the other thing that I'll mention, which is what both Bill and Chelsea said, is not everything needs to be in your one sentence or your big idea. This is just helpful for you to frame the larger story. And there's other areas that you can actually fill in those details. It's just important for you to start understanding what are the key questions, what are people really curious about, so that you can make sure you're answering that on the actual post that you put on the platform. So let's review. So what's the formula of a good story? So we talked a little bit about the story brief, like what's the big sort of challenge and what's the action we want people to take? What does our audience need and what are they motivated by? And then what's the big idea, that one sentence? So the next step, which we're not going to have time to do on this, but is going to be your homework, is, okay, what are the details? How do we start painting a clearer picture about what our organization does? And how do we make sure that this feels really clear and compelling, right? And the way that you do that is through this idea of testing, which is very common in the design process. So really putting something, anything in front of people, and then getting their feedback and then refining what your story is. The more that you share your story, the more buy-in you're going to have, the more people are going to invest in it, the more you're going to be able to refine it. And again, that's what makes a story good, but how do you take it from good to great? So a great story is really clear, and a great story is really compelling. That really is the core of what we think good stories look like. And so getting to understand whether it's really resonating with people, whether it's emotional, whether it's actually causing someone to act, like that makes it compelling. And then making sure people understand it, maybe making sure people get what it is your organization is doing or what story you're trying to tell, means that it's really clear. So when you put those two things together, it becomes really great. So the way you would go from going good to great is you would share your story out. So in this case on the platform, or maybe in somewhere to stakeholders in your community, you would get feedback, and then you would refine your story and then reshare it again. And it would just repeat this process over and over again. And I'll send this deck over so that you can, remember these sort of processes and tips. And then finally, I would just say, don't worry about perfecting your drafts. Like, don't worry about perfecting your story. It's really about getting something out to people as quickly as possible so that you can learn and refine. When you're collecting feedback, not all feedback's created equally. So take what makes sense for you to refine your story. And then finally, remember that it's all about being as clear and compelling as possible. And once it's finally resonating with audiences, you're there, you did it, congrats, celebration. So the homework in my final slide is I urge you to get 3 people to read your idea and to understand the idea that you submitted on the platform, and ask them for their feedback, and take the interactions that we just did and the questions that we just used and the prompts to give feedback, equip them with the skills to actually give feedback in a way that's really helpful for you, and try to refine your idea contribution on the platform so that it's as clear and compelling as possible. And then we'll also have community members, we'll also have our team, and we'll also have others around the world that will be giving you comments on your idea so that you can, get to the crux of what you're trying to share with your organization, your story. So that's it. Yeah, sorry, we went a little bit over, but I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Scott. And I think just to close that, the top of your contribution, there's an opportunity to have 1 sentence, and that's a really great place for you to put this 1 sentence that you're working on. That's the catch. That's what hooks us in. So that's a really good spot to do that. So thank you, Scott, so much. We're going to turn it to Kati to send us over a few questions that folks pre-submitted ahead of time.
Yeah, definitely. So Becca from Australia asks, could you discuss the ethics of trying to collect stories from community members who may not have the time or interest in sharing their experience?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And feel free for others to jump in too. I think it's so important that we honor where our stories are coming from. So it's really, really important that we're consistently talking to those about what story we're collecting and how we're using it. I think when we talk about the ethics of storytelling, which is like, we could do another hour-long webinar on, and it's something really fascinating to me. I think the short of the long story is that 1, this is really, really important. Please be thinking about this. 2, make sure you're getting the consent of people to use their story. Make sure that they're agreeing to use their words, their face, the representation of the impact that your organizations have had, and that some people are not ready to share their story or don't want to share their story, and we need to honor that. And we can also learn more about why that is. So I might, depending on your relationship with that person, I might have a conversation with them and say like, oh, I totally understand that, here's the story that we would want to tell, and here's how we tell it, and here's why it's important for us to tell that story. But I want to honor you too. So can you tell me a little bit more about why you're having some hesitations, or why is now not the right time? And learning, I want to learn more about maybe when is the right time, if ever. And so giving them an opportunity to go deeper and to share a little bit more about how their story could be shared and what their story is really helpful too. Any other thoughts?
I think the only other thing I'd add is we know this challenge, the topic area is really sensitive. And so it is absolutely okay if you don't want to share actual pictures of your end users. This is, like I said before, a great time to draw pictures, to use the user experience maps. And it's also okay to keep your users anonymous on the platform. That is 100% fine.
Yeah. Yeah, the one thought I had to add to that is, if you do have the consent and someone is comfortable with their story being shared, you could think about ways to make it easier for them, not make them have to come back. Maybe while you're doing the service or the activity, you could take the pictures or do the interview. Just think about how you can integrate it in and make it easiest for them. So,
Yeah. I think the only other thing I would add to that is sometimes like in this process of folks telling their story, it's a really powerful moment for them. It can be really healing. It can maybe reopen trauma. It can lead to a lot of different things that we can't imagine. And so just being aware that there's a lot of responsibility with asking for people's stories and then receiving it, especially around a topic like this. And just making sure that, even with consent, that it's really important to be thinking about the well-being and the safety of those that are involved. So your context best, and we trust that you will be using stories wisely. But I think just to answer Becca's question, all things to think about.
thanks, Katia. There may be 1 or 2 more we could squeeze in.
Yeah, definitely. So we've had a lot of participants ask how can they navigate and figure out how to simplify incredibly complex ideas. So to add to refining the story and gathering feedback, are there other ways to simplify a complex issue?
Yeah, there's 2 ways I would think about this. So one is structural sort of ways of forming a story, and the second is the aesthetics of a story. So for structure, something I would think about is I would ask feedback on at what moment in the story did things become confusing? Or what do you think the big takeaway of our organization is? I would ask questions like that to understand, am I getting the right information at the right time to my audience? You might imagine there's different ways of structuring a story. You could maybe parse it out into the different activities your organization does. Maybe you could parse it out based on the way that your end users or the folks that you're serving are being impacted by your organization, right? Like there's a lot of different creative approaches to structuring a story that you can think about and get feedback on to make sure that the complex ideas and problems and solutions that you're offering are as clear and concise as possible. So that's structural. And then there's aesthetics, right? So visuals can be really helpful to getting a lot of different information across in really a condensed way. You can also think about, headers, things like that. Like how do you make really clear buckets of information so that the reader understands like what it is that you're talking about. So it's not just a huge block of text. Like what are the different strategies in terms of aesthetics that you can use to make your idea a little bit more clear? I know there's other ideas there.
I have one thought, and just quickly, think about your audience too. If it's a really technical proposal, great, maybe you can use acronyms and sort of technical terms in your sector. But if not, I encourage you to find someone that doesn't work in your space and share your idea with them and see maybe you're sharing words that people don't understand outside of your organization or space. So that's one thought too. Kathy, any last quick ones there?
No, we're going to pass off to you, Chelsea, to close out.
Great. Okay, thanks, Kathy. And if there are other questions that you have, please always feel free to email us at amplify@ideo.org. We check that and we'll be sure to get back to you. We'll get back to the other questions time to answer today. Scott, do you have any final thoughts before we close up for today?
I just want to, I've used the word honor a lot, but I really do love that word because I think it's so important when we tell stories to honor ourselves and honor those that are sharing so vulnerably the stories of their organization and the work that you do. And I'm feeling very humble and grateful to have this space, and I hope that you gained something out of it. I hope it was inspiring and that you're walking away with some tools that can help you with telling your organization's story on the platform and beyond the platform. So I'll slow down. Thank you, Danny. So I just really wanted to thank you all. Just wanted to honor you all. If you have any other questions, again, please email amplify@ideo.org. We'll write that email address in the chat. And I hope this was helpful to you. I hope the experience of getting feedback, receiving feedback is going to be helpful as you do your homework. I really hope that the story blueprint is helpful as you frame the contents of your story. And I hope that you, importantly, get your story in front of people and actually refine it. And that's what this phase is all about. It's about, getting to a more clear, getting to a more compelling story that can really support your audience with understanding the incredible work that you do in the world and in your communities. And thank you for all that you do. It's really beautiful work. I've been inspired. I'm looking at many of your ideas on the platform.
Thank you so much, Scott. Closing housekeeping for today's call. Look out for an email from me later today that will include the deck from today, the toolkit, the recording, as well as the guidance for the refinement phase. So you'll get that today. Again, as I mentioned before, feedback from the set of experts, and you'll get a sense of who's in that group today as well. You'll get that in the comment section of your idea. And the deadline is October 26th for final refinement. So take that time to work with your team to think through what's most important to share on the platform. Again, email us your questions. Otherwise, that's it for today. We really appreciate you making the time to connect with us, and we're always so excited to hear your stories and your perspectives. So thank you so much, and we look forward to working with you more. Everyone have a great one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, y'all. Thanks for joining.